Beautiful tragedies. They're a centerpiece in the last 20 years of cinema. Some of the biggest movies of the last 2 decades have focused on the fallout of brothers in arms. Ones where these brothers end up turning against each other and facing off in one final duel to prove who was right and who was wrong. The lines aren't exactly that black and white, but some movies that come to mind are Captain America's Civil War, Revenge of the Sith, and this means war, I don't know. Transformers 1, though, is a beautiful tragedy. Take, for example, the quality of the movie and their marketing department. One is beautiful, the other is fucking horrific and should be fired off into the sun. They should have honestly given the marketing budget to TF Hype Guy on Twitter.com because at least he cares. Another beautiful tragedy, though, is the fallout of Brotherhood, which is shared between Orion Pax and D-16. This calamitous outcome plagues all of Transformers media. Before TF1, it was shown in Prime. The story of Megatron and Optimus was honestly probably best depicted in the Transformers Prime flashback, but that was dethroned by this incredibly tangible story of brothers. Aside from TF1 being the greatest thing to ever be made, it brings to life a different aspect of the Brotherhood scene between the faces of the franchise. Since G1, they have introduced multiple iterations of this concept. There's the aforementioned Clerk and Gladiator used during TF Prime. In the Bayverse, they were a part of a revolutionary group, but the fallen corrupted Megatron, and Optimus was also like a knight or something. In Transformers Animated, Megatron didn't even know who Optimus was.
I don't even know who you are.
And in G1, Megatron just fucking killed him because he thought it'd be funny. TF1, on the other hand, goes further in depth and gives us a real story of brotherhood, societal structure, rationale for decisions, and personalities that lead to what can only be described as a tragically beautiful implosion of friendship. If you watched the horrific trailers for this movie, playing some classic rock song, you probably expected a homey Transformers movie with kiddie jokes and a cliché turn. And yeah, you do get some of that, but this film doesn't really hold back after about the halfway point. Starting from their introduction, you get to see a lot of that buddy-buddy dynamic, but there are some very subtle hints at what's to come. The first depiction of their dynamic isn't even when we see them first interact with each other. It's a few moments earlier when D-16 covers for Orion for breaking into the archives again. Their relationship clearly is seen from this and even the later interaction with Darkwing.
Excuse me, sister.
Is Orion gets himself into trouble and D-16 has to bail him out. While this is a very naive way to perceive their friendship, it is something that provides constant blockages for them. These two bots are clearly minors, and they're always in the trenches digging for energon. Their brotherhood is founded on a fundamental trust in each other, established in a flashback at the end of the movie. It's a really touching scene that shows that they were turned online at the same time, presumably. They then came to the conclusion that they would also look out for each other, and I have to say I love the subtle nod to D-16 becoming Megatron because his hand is covering the last part of Megatronus' name when Orion first introduces himself. This dynamic, though, leads us to a definitive contrast between the bots. D-16 is very clearly content with the societal structure of their world, one in which Sentinel Prime has to go to the surface to search for the matrix of leadership, one where natural progression within their ranks is done through hard, arduous work. As shown with their mining badges, D is clearly a higher-ranked miner, one who grinds his gears to provide for a society that only benefits those with their transformation cogs. Orion, on the other hand, foresees a future where the matrix of leadership returns to their hands. His rebellious nature and desire for information lead him into trouble. I believe a misconception with his interests is that he is selfish in searching for these details. However, it is Orion that is completely different from his best friend. He doesn't accept the status quo, and his hunt for the Matrix isn't for his own personal power. It's for the betterment and even advancement of society. Though with these two vastly dissimilar traits, they still get along. I think their brotherhood is best depicted when Wheeljack ruptures a vein in the mine, as if they had to run the same exercise 100 times and again D-16 and Orion constantly acknowledge where the other is throughout their run. They also are the only two miners to stay back and make sure Jazz escapes, which they do through teamwork. It's clearly shown that the strength of their relationship exists in their need of each other. A survival, a trust, a bond of life and death. Without each other, they could be the one left behind in the mine. While the foundation of their brotherhood exists in surviving these mines, what differentiates them is not their actual contrasts, but how they live within this Iacon society. There are some very heavy themes of classism and unionism in TF1. It's not as vicious as the Capitol and the districts in the Hunger Games, but it is an underlying issue. How D-16 and Orion see this is what completely derails their relationship, rather than the uniqueness that exists within each of them. I think comparatively to other media, this is a very strong point of interest in this story. Take for example Anakin's fall to darkness from Revenge of the Sith. He's lured in by a trusted friend. The Jedi, Obi-Wan, and even Padme in the deleted scenes are untrustworthy because they don't have the answers. The fight at the end between Skywalker and Kenobi is less on ideals, but more on the corruption of a soul from a trusted figure. A little bit like that fallen, corrupting Megatron mentioned from the Bayverse. In Transformers 1, the true fractions between D-16 and Orion exist in their disagreements within society. After Darkwing punches D-16 in the face, he's the first one to express that Darkwing was in the right, because they stepped out of line.
You know you were out of line. Talking back to a superior like that.
If Darkwing was out of line, he deserves it.
This is coming from the same bot who actively lies to authorities to save Orion's ass. Then they go to the Iacon 5000 where D-16 says,
"If we survive this, I'm gonna kill you!"
But in the following sequence, he, after getting approval from Sentinel, feels less frustrated with the circumstances, because it's like Orion said.
You did this for me?
No, I did this for us.
This wasn't necessarily an act of rebellion because Sentinel loved it. He enthusiastically called them heroes and demanded that they be given the best care in all of Iacon. This isn't where the fracture starts. Yeah, there are personality differences, but brothers are meant to be different. It's not in who they are that fully drives a wedge. It's where they sit in society that determines everything for their brotherhood. While yes, it's easy to place D and Orion into two different categories, I believe it's important to acknowledge that these contrasts aren't what turns D away from Orion. Yeah, I know that Megatron tells Orion that,
"I'm done saving you."
but that only comes after his entire worldview is shattered. That's after desperation corrupts his entire being. D-16, in a world where Sentinel is still the protector of Cybertron, does not drop Orion. Does he get annoyed? Absolutely. Who doesn't get annoyed at their brothers or best friends from time to time? But drop him after unintentionally shooting him? A socially structured D-16 does not do that. So the weird thing about this fracturing is that theoretically, in their own ways, they are both right. The true slip in their friendship isn't until they learn the fate of the Primes. Again, even though they are breaking protocol to go out and find the Matrix of Leadership, D-16 is not fully derailed. He honestly seems enthralled to be on this mission with Orion initially.
D, we're really doing this.
So glad I'm out here with you. This was a great idea.
They're on this grand adventure to save Cybertron by bringing back the Energon and returning the Matrix of Leadership to the last Prime. This is a crusade of justice, when a society that D-16 believes in still stands. It's here where D, in his own way, sympathizes fully with Orion's rebellious habits. They are unnecessary in many ways, and they even disrupt the status quo of D's obedience or even compliancy. But here, after seeing Alpha Trion's message, which inspires hope, D is fully invested in finding the Matrix. They literally, minutes after he says he's glad to be out here, in movie time at least, they almost die to the Quintessons, and he doesn't blink an eye. There's not a reaction towards Orion. He doesn't get mad at him. It continues all the way up into the Tomb of the Primes, when he comes face to face with his hero. He's upset. You can see it in his eyes. He's sad. He's frustrated. But that again is not directed towards Orion. His semblance of understanding his own society still exists. He doesn't take his grief out on Orion after finding Megatronus, but the beginning of tension starts when they learn the truth.
Sentinel is no prime.
The true fracturing between Orion Pax and D-16 is not their fundamental values, until society collapses and life becomes a lie. D-16 is the most by-the-book bot on screen throughout the movie, aside from Elita 1. His feelings on Megatronus' death and his worldview shift drastically when Alpha Trion tells them how the Primes were defeated. The betrayal that kills the protectors of Cybertron, the realization that Sentinel's working with the Quintessons, and the reality of his life is where the fracture splits their friendship. As was mentioned before, D never had a problem with leaving Iacon after the train derailment. But when his understanding of the way his world works slips out from under him, when the lines drawn between minor and upper class are shown, when D-16 sees the classism, that's when the break begins between he and Orion. It honestly can be heard in the way he addresses Sentinel's arrival, even before the Quintesson meeting begins.
He's here. Sentinel Prime is here.
Of course, a couple of seconds later, he says this.
Traitor!
But it's within these very few, very crucial scenes that D-16 turns on his brother. He blames Orion for making them break protocol.
You just had to break protocol.
For going out against the rule of the land, for exposing the truth, and more than anything, I don't even think it's here where he's mad at Orion. D-16 is definitely projecting his anger a bit, because he is forgetting his aforementioned lack of resistance to continue the journey out to find the Primes.
So glad I'm out here with you. This was a great idea.
But the true shift, the moment that defines the fracture in Brotherhood, in the midst of what is truly their second on-screen argument is,
No, I want to kill him!
In that moment, D-16 openly ruptures the friendship, not because of Orion's action to bring them out there, but because in D's eyes, he's not taking the treachery of Sentinel as seriously as it should be taken. In the medical bay, we see a silent treatment and an argument because of something that affected D-16 within the confines of society. But inside the Tomb of the Primes, we see that their argument becomes a fundamental difference on how to approach a broken worldview, how they might fix a society that is ruled by classism and fundamentally broken at its core. This difference, the one that has existed throughout the entire movie, shows itself once again here. When the Viacons arrive at the tomb, D-16 responds with violence.
Oh, yes. Time to fight back.
But Alpha Trion tells them to escape. You know who doesn't follow that order? Orion Pax, who refuses to leave Alpha Trion. The difference has been there the entire time. One is rooted in self-preservation. The other is idealistic in team growth, unity. It's really thinly veiled because of how fast the movie goes by, but I see these subtle gestures as proof that Orion and D-16 might be the opposite of how they are typically depicted. Now, this isn't me saying that D-16 is quote-unquote selfish, as some have called Orion, but it is me suggesting that D-16 is rooted in self-preservation more than in his contractual societal position. When the law of the land no longer holds value, he must find the best way to survive within it. Orion looks for the best way to bridge the gaps, to best benefit everyone. This self-preservation from D-16 is best shown in these two scenes.
I got it. I will never trust a so-called leader ever again.
And if he weren't stunned, D-16 would likely tell Orion that the only bot he could trust was himself. Receiving their T-cogs, learning the truth, and reeling from their newfound reality is the true transformation. Ha, get it, Transformers? Transformation of self. This writing on the wall has always existed, because the existential difference between these two is not selfishness or rebelliousness, it's self-preservation and blind optimism. One of self, one of the collective good. You can even see it throughout Orion's diplomacy with Starscream following their capture. While Orion is busy trying to make peace with the Cybertronian High Guard so they can work together for a better future, you can see the background D-16 looking at the ground. He's heaving like he'd just run a circuit. But no, he was coming to one conclusion.
I found out that Sentinel is rotten today, and I'm going to make him pay for it. Today!
And this severs the bond between he and Orion, though it must be stated that this Brotherhood, at this point, is not beyond saving. Even though D-16 finds his new power by beating the ever-living shit out of Starscream, there is a moment of clarity in his rage. After everything he has learned and suffered through since Alpha Trion's life-changing revelation, it's Orion Pax he listens to. D-16 is mere milliseconds away from pulverizing Starscream, and Orion tells him to stop, because Starscream is not the enemy. And D-16 stops. All of that restraint he'd shown within society is gone, but his best friend and brother has a point. Not that sparing Starscream is the morally right decision, it isn't, but the real enemy deserves his full rage. This idealistic difference has not been fully realized by Orion yet, but internally, D, I believe, acknowledges it here. Maybe not that Orion will hold him back from destroying Sentinel and starting a new order, but that Orion doesn't have the spark to do what is necessary to achieve complete and total victory. This is the last little bit of friendship holding on. I think an even more important showcase of that is the Megatronus Prime decal on his shoulder. That was his gift from his brother. It's a very small reminder that Orion is still his best friend, but that insignia of the greatest Prime to ever live will eventually be the last straw for D-16 before he becomes Megatron. For now though, as he defeats Starscream and listens to Orion, he reveals one final thing.
This is the last time I show mercy!
And then there's the haunting scene where Orion sees the full transformation of his brother. Of course, it's not completed yet, but it's something that Orion has aspirations to save. Remember when I mentioned how both were theoretically right? Well, they kinda are. These approaches to revolution are vastly different. You see this depicted with the main cast fighting Sentinel. Orion, Alita, and B all come to the conclusion that they can use a plan to turn Iacon against Sentinel, while D commits fully to beating the life out of him. I also think it's important to notice the difference here. I think it's once society collapses that Orion might feel useless without D-16 by his side. I don't see D as completely disregarding Orion, but I do see Pax feeling helpless. The usually hopeful and optimistic Orion is seemingly lost without D, and potentially has internalized what he saw the night before. In contrast to D, at around the same time, he's facing Sentinel without bending or breaking. He literally stands against the law himself, and becomes a rallying for the future Decepticons. I think that's a very key concept here though. D is depicting the one bot over another rhetoric he displayed inside the crashed ship. As later shown, when B tells him to stay down,
D, stay down.
he refuses. The idealistic difference between Orion and D are best shown through their methods of resistance. The diplomacy Orion tried with the High Guard has semi-fallen through, even though he has support from Shockwave and Soundwave, but he still returns to the Miners' District and gets on everyone's level. D-16 is standing alone, among a room full of kneeling High Guard soldiers. Orion is kneeling in a room full of standing miners. One rises to their own beat, the other rises when he lifts the sparks of others. This is where the true betrayal or the true break in their friendship is realized. It's best described as an unmovable object meeting an unstoppable force. Once that Megatronus decal is scribed across D-16's chest as a mark of shame, Orion's influence over D is completely lost. Their friendship is broken and scribbled into an uneven mess of misunderstandings and shifting perspectives. The only way for a truly unified Cybertron is by revealing the truth, or perhaps by destroying its oppressor and his supporters. And finally, after spending so much time trying to end the fight, even after D fully sees that Sentinel's reputation has been exposed, he cannot stop himself. Who he is, what his values are, trump everything he knows is true about the society he once stood under. Orion, inversely, sees that with the truth liberated amongst the people, they can make the right change to save their society, and then you get an execution delayed by Orion. Orion saving Sentinel was not just an outrageous action in D's eyes, but also a sign of weakness. If his values have transformed into the strength of one over another, then sparing someone like D had Starscream is not within this new future. After all, his entire life was a lie, one ignored by the upper class, and one encouraged by its leader. And while Orion could, maybe even should, take this stance, he recognizes that starting anew cannot start with vengeance. It needs to be a unity. It needs to be in bringing themselves together rather than destroying themselves. And what makes this all the more tragic is both D and Orion have seen their methods work for themselves. The High Guard followed D because of his strength over one another. The miners listened to Orion because of his faith in all of them. They are truly two sides of the same coin of revolution. But after that coin is flipped, it's Orion who must make the ultimate sacrifice, the one that tests if his values are truly rightly placed. As a side note, the scene titled on the soundtrack as The Fall is literally one of the greatest things ever made. I think about it at least once a week. It is incredible. But I do believe it's worth bringing up the title of the actual song, because it's both the physical fall of Orion and the metaphorical fall of D. This is the birth of Megatron and Optimus. But just before the fall truly begins, I think the last little bit of Brotherhood is broken by D-16. This is where the new fundamental understanding of what society needs and his methods of achieving it cross the line, and where he truly betrays his brother. Orion and D are both right, up until this point. Orion's own sacrifice is the furthest point of his own beliefs. A life worth living is giving it up to save his friend from falling apart. D tearing down the status quo to create a new one, but in doing so, destroying the very thing that gave him the chance to see the truth. They both reach the furthest point, and it's D who crosses fully over that line to a point of no return. When Orion tells D,
No.
this isn't him refusing death. He's accepted it by jumping in front of the cannon. He's telling D to not lose himself. And in this, Megatron skews his perspective of who Orion was the entire time, seeing him as a nuisance, without any perks, without any benefit to his own goals. Orion in D's, now Megatron's eyes, has just saved their enemy. It's not the symbolism of the act, but what it means to D in its bare bones. And thus, he says,
I'm done saving you.
This concept of revolutionaries disagreeing on how to revolt isn't necessarily new in media. I just did a Hunger Games video about this, in a way. But also, in Transformers, like the TF Prime flashback, you can see that fundamentally the break between Orion and Megatron is fundamental values. While both are right to challenge the corruption, it's their methods of doing it that break their brotherhood. I think Transformers 1 captures perhaps the most tragically beautiful break between brothers in the cinematic format. Because as I pointed to throughout the video, I think it was always a fine line. One that wasn't in broad strokes, but simply a shift in the society that existed. They would always be brothers, but once society broke, then their brotherhood no longer existed. Once the reality of Sentinel's grip was revealed, their friendship started to buckle. It was never before that veil was lifted. I absolutely believe there are varying conversations to be made between the differences of Optimus and Megatron, especially after the fall scene, and during the fight. Like, for example, I absolutely believe that Megatron hopes his friend Orion will forgive him for going too far with his idealism. The eye flicker from Megatron's eyes and the lubricants on his face, great callback to G1 by the way, are indicative of some sort of regret. I think part of Megatron hoped that Orion would forgive him, because there was a blind optimism that his friend always had, and surely he could understand his actions. But as a Prime, as a reborn or even resurrected Transformer, Optimus understands that in Megatron telling him,
I'm done saving you,
that D-16 is no more, that no matter what, Megatron wouldn't ever be able to live with Optimus, because he said it earlier.
I got it. I will never trust a so-called leader ever again.
And Orion was perhaps too naive to realize it before he became a Prime. And so, if you like this video, peak cinema like Transformers 1 or myself, you know what to do.